1984 was an important year for Hollywood. Murray and Aykroyd battled giant marshmallows in New York. Arnie fought multiple battles across time. And the Brat Pack defended America from communist invaders. It was no less significant for the world of horror. 1984 saw the rise of Freddy Krueger and the fall of Jason Voorhees. It also gave us a humble little film that would go on to become a legend in the world of cult horror classics. I love a good Stephen King movie. Cat's Eye, Pet Sematary, Maximum Overdrive, and many more. Despite having only read 2 of his novels from beginning to end, I can say with conviction that he is my favorite writer of all time. And that leads us to the subject of today's video. Children of the Corn. Brace yourselves, guys, because I'm about to heavily criticize a beloved horror movie.
Oh my God!
Don't get me wrong, I loved this film growing up, but the more I watch it as an adult, I can't help but notice chinks in its armor, and I have to talk about them. But before I start throwing shade, let's talk about the movie itself. It was released in 1984, and it was based on Stephen King's short story of the same name, that was originally published in the March 1977 issue of Penthouse. So considering the story was popular enough to be turned into a movie, the age-old excuse of I only buy them for the articles is actually plausible. It was directed by Fritz Kirsch, and I'm taking on faith that I'm pronouncing that name right, the genius behind such cinematic masterpieces as Crayola Kids Adventures and one episode of Swamp Thing. It stars Linda Hamilton, who has always held a spot in my top 10 list of Hollywood megababes, and Peter Horton. You know, the guy from 30-something? 30-something, it was a show. Ask your mom. Okay, so what's Children of the Corn all about? One Sunday afternoon in the sleepy little town of Gatlin, Nebraska, all the kids in the town just up and murder the adults. Except for this little guy, Job, and his sister Sarah, who weren't invited to the super secret murder meeting.
It was about 3 years ago. I was the only kid in church that day. The others were with Isaac out in the cornfield.
That apparently took place in a cornfield on a Sunday during church service, so nobody thought it was weird that not a single kid showed up for church on Sunday.
Right.
See, some unseen entity, called He Who Walks Behind the Rose, has compelled all the kids to form this weird little corn-worshipping murder cult, and they're led by 13-year-old Isaac. He's your typical little Napoleon type.
Take them back where they were.
But they had a game and music. They're forbidden.
Question me not, Malachi.
Interesting fact about this actor, he was actually 26 years old at the time of filming. As a child, he suffered from a growth hormone deficiency, and he never made it beyond 5 feet tall. This should have been a boon for his career, considering that perpetual child actors were all the rage in the 80s. The problem is, at the time, American audiences wanted adorable little black kids that never aged, instead of angry little white kids that never aged. But he did find success later on playing Cousin It in the Addams Family, so there's that. And his right-hand man is Malachi. Now, does anybody remember an episode of Star Trek Voyager where Tuvok and Neelix were merged into a single being because of a transporter malfunction? Imagine the same scenario, but it's Dave Mustaine and Ron Perlman. The rest of the kids are just randos, and they're really bad at the whole being in a murder cult thing. You'll see why later on. So yeah, they kill every single adult in town, and then spend the next 3 years sitting in the cornfield, listening to Isaac and Malachi talk like you would imagine a 13-year-old would think that a religious zealot would talk like.
A time of tribulation has come. A test is at hand. The final test.
What has the Lord commanded?
Enter Bert and Vicky. Bert just graduated medical school, and they're traveling through Nebraska on their way to Seattle so Bert can start his internship. They haven't even passing nearby Gatlin when this happens. This is one of the disciples who's fed up with Isaac's bullshit and tries to run away, but Malachi wasn't having it.
Hello, me. Meet the real me.
Bert examines the body and deduces that he died from having his throat slit, not being run over.
Do you think it might have been some kind of accident? Like farm equipment or something?
Not one like that. His throat was cut deliberately.
Because, yeah, you definitely need to have a medical degree to identify a giant slash mark across the throat. I swear that's the only reason they added the whole plot point of him being a doctor, because he wasn't a doctor in the story. So they shove the kid in the trunk and head to the nearest gas station to get help. And in true horror movie fashion, the old man running the gas station does his best to casually steer them away from danger.
We've had ourselves...
I ain't got no gas.
No, I don't need gas.
I ain't got no diesel fuel neither.
No, you don't understand. I need to use
Don't buy no gas. You can't use no restaurant.
Listen, town's full of crazy kids. Only reason they keep me alive is for plot development. But of course, Bert and Vicky don't listen and head straight into Gatlin and realize that it's strangely deserted and covered with corn. Yeah, that's not weird. Let's just keep exploring. They quickly notice that the diner appears to have been deserted for many years. Again, let's just keep exploring. So instead of just getting the hell out of there, they decide to go start exploring some of the houses. And here they meet Sarah, Job's sister. Now's a good time to mention that Sarah is psychic.
You have the gift of sight. This is a blessing, my child.
Because it just wouldn't be a Stephen King story without a psychic kid. And Bert decides that Vicky's in good hands with little Audrey Rose here, while he goes and explores the rest of this creepy-ass town. And of course, that's when Malachi and his minions bust in and nab Vicky.
Hello, me. It's me again.
Meanwhile, Bert wanders into a church and interrupts some kind of a ritual sacrifice. The rule is, when the kiddos reach the age of 19, they must offer themselves up as a sacrifice to he who walks behind the rose. And you remember when I said that the kids were kind of bad at the whole murder cult thing? This is what I'm talking about.
Hold the Outlander!
Come on, they're kids. This has been going on for 3 years. Okay? Sure, they were all for it when it started, but you know how kids are. 1 week, they're all about Transformers. Next week, they're all about murdering every single adult in town. Week after that, oh hey, G.I. Joe. You seriously expect them to stay committed to murder and corn worship when there's cool shit like the Bashosaurus to play with? Okay, so what bugs me about this scene is that Bert, instead of just saying, well, this is fucked up, and backing away slowly, proceeds to have a theological debate with these kids.
So what do you mean, as it is written? Written where? What, in this? You rewriting the whole thing, or just the parts that suit your need?
Because yes, if I was a stranger in a strange town, and I walked into a church where there were a bunch of kids holding weapons, while one of them was carving up his chest willingly, and somebody else was passing around their blood to drink, arguing with them about their dogma is definitely the first thing I'd do. Meanwhile, Isaac decides that Vicky would make a great lawn ornament, since his last one's gotten a little weather-beaten. Back in town, Bert meets up with Job and Sarah, and they fill him in on everything that happened with Isaac and the cult and yada yada yada. We've already covered that, so let's see how Vicky's doing.
99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer. Take one down, pass it around, 98 bottles of beer on the wall.
We must sacrifice them both tonight.
Amos will satisfy him. We need the woman. She'll bring the man to us.
No, he must be taken without her. We cannot remove her from this place. It is holy.
We will bring the Lord too by using one.
Not blaspheme, Malachi. You know not the laws. He speaks them only to me.
I think not, Isaac. You are the one who's lost favor with him. He's the God of blood and sacrifice, not ceremony.
Ah, sacrilege! Down on your knees, heretic!
Shut your mouth, Isaac. You've grown prideful apart from us.
So yeah, Malachi's decided he's had enough of Isaac's shit, pulls a coup, and decides to make him swap places with Vicky.
They are tired of your talk, Isaac. I've shown them what I can do. Cut the woman down. Put Isaac in her place. Yeah, we will see how the
You will respect my authority!
Later that evening, Job and Sarah lead Bert to the field where they do all of their culty, murdery activities. And he shows up just in time to witness Isaac being eaten, I guess, by he who walks behind the rose. And like Hawkeye in the finale of Last of the Mohicans, he just saunters on up to the group and proceeds to have yet another theological debate with them.
Just because some self-proclaimed holy man said this is what God commands? So? What kind of a God tells his children to kill their parents, huh?
Dude! Yes, clearly, whatever they're worshiping isn't God, but it's absolutely real. You just witnessed its power. You're not gonna convince them that they're being duped. Get your wife and get the fuck out of there. So anywho, about that moment, he who walks behind the rose is pissed at all this blasphemy going on and decides to flex his muscles.
He wants you too, Malachi. He wants you too.
And through the power of poor storytelling, Bert finds out that if you burn the corn, he who walks behind the rose will lose his power or die or whatever.
Joe, what was the blue man doing at the still?
He hooked the hose up to it and was trying to roll it out.
But what stopped him?
Malachi!
Lake of fire! Fire! He was gonna burn the field!
Can I just point out how stupid that is? This all-powerful demonic entity, all his strength is tied to corn. Corn! That would be like if Superman's weakness was wind. Well, naturally, Bert's plan is met with resistance. Very little resistance. Okay, so what? He who blaws behind the block can only control a few corn stalks at a time? He was so taken aback by Job's ability to untie a knot that he's like, huh, clearly I've been bested. I shouldn't try this again. So they burned the corn and were treated to a very unimpressive example of 80s rotoscoping. And everybody's happy. Yay! And that's Children of the Corn. Sorry guys, this movie just didn't age well. Don't get me wrong, I'm a fan. I truly believe that it has earned its status as a cult movie, but the older I get, I just can't ignore the logical problems with the plot. See, there's a concept called willing suspension of disbelief. That is where the audience is willing to set aside logic in order for a good story. But there's a limit to what the audience will put up with. For example, I can accept that vampires are real and sparkle in the daylight. I cannot accept that they would willingly choose to repeat high school over and over and over for all eternity. Likewise, I can accept that an unseen entity can convince all the children of a small town to murder every single adult. I can't believe that this went on for 3 years with nobody noticing. Yes, Gatlin's a small town, but it's not on the freaking moon. It's got a post office, it's got a school, it's got law enforcement, it's got things that tie itself to the outside community. Eventually, people in power are going to take notice and they're going to do something about it. Yes, it's perfectly plausible that a bunch of kids with farm implements managed to kill all the adults in the town because they didn't see it coming. But I'm quite certain a single National Guard unit could shut this shit down pretty quick. And I think that's the main thing, was just the 3-year gap. It'd be much more plausible if this had happened over, say, the course of a few weeks or even a few months. I can set aside my disbelief that long, just not 3 years. Okay, now I want to go back to my nitpicking about Bert chastising these kids for being religious zealots. In my research, I found out that the screenwriter for this movie, who wasn't Stephen King, by the way, wanted this movie to be a metaphor for the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Dude, if you want to make a movie about the Islamic Revolution in Iran, then go make a movie about the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Fans of certain genres do not like political intrigue shoehorned into their story. So as I mentioned, yes, Stephen King didn't write the screenplay. He submitted one. Studio rejected it. Wow, the most prolific horror writer on the planet right now just submitted a screenplay for his story that we're adapting. But let's go with this guy who wrote a single episode of Hill Street Blues. And I'm curious to know what Stephen King's version would have been like, because there are a few subtle differences between the movie and the novel. It's all basically the same. All the major characters are there, except for the fact that Bert and Vicky died. The crucifixion scene had just a little more of a Mel Gibson flair to it, and Bert just got straight up devoured by he who walks behind the rose. Malachi never betrayed Isaac, and life in the cornfield continued unabated. So, obviously, the movie didn't do well. The critics trashed it, shock, but it didn't do well in the box office either. I think the only thing that saved it was HBO and home video, but that did allow it to attain its cult status, and almost a decade later, we got a sequel. And then another sequel. And another. And so on and so forth. Are they any good? I don't know. I've not watched them. But I will watch them for you, dear viewer. So stay tuned for future reviews. The last note that I want to go out on, the coolest thing that I discovered while researching this movie was not the first adaptation of Stephen King's short story. A year earlier, in 1983, someone made a short film called Disciples of the Crow. I know nothing about this film. I cannot find any research on it. But It is available to watch on YouTube right now. It's only 18 minutes long, so if you're a fan of Children of the Corn, go check it out. It's definitely worth your time. All right, guys, that's all I got to say about Children of the Corn. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
99 bottles of beer on the wall, 99 bottles of beer. Take one down, pass it around. 98 bottles of beer on the wall, 98 bottles of beer on the wall, 98 bottles of beer. Take one down, pass